Hey there, and welcome back to Day 3 of Gratitude Week here at Spark Creativity. Today, we're looking back at an interview with Dr. Claudia Rodriguez-Mojica and Dr. Allison Briceño about just how important it is to provide students with diverse books and choice in their reading experience. I'm grateful that they took the time to talk with us and to be able to spotlight their work here again. Let's do it. Today on the podcast, we're talking about why offering our students diverse texts and giving them choice over their reading is so vitally important. My guests, Dr. Claudia Rodriguez-Mojica and Dr. Allison Briceño, have recently written a carefully researched and well-crafted book called Conscious Classrooms, all about why our students need to be surrounded by diverse texts and how teachers can choose and integrate these texts. While Claudia and Allison share examples in their book from their work with younger kids, the research and practices they provide are equally important for all of our students. We'll be talking about how to choose diverse texts for your class, why it matters so very much, and how to help your students develop a critical lens about representation that they can apply when they are reading. Hey there, I'm your host, Betsy Potash, and one-pagers, project-based learning, and choice reading are my jam. I believe in you, and my goal is to help you explore all the creative possibilities you dream of for your classroom. I'm an educator, a chocolate cake aficionado, a traveler who can't wait to get back to Barcelona, and the kind of mom who brings her own mini makerspace to her kid's classroom when she comes to volunteer. I know this for sure, creativity isn't always easy. As a creative teacher, you get parent calls you treasure, and plenty of sidelong comments you'd rather forget. But here's the bottom line. Creative education can ignite a spark in your students and change their lives forever. You and I know this. You're an innovator. And while it's sometimes hard, it's so worth it. So let's explore the world of creative education together. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast. Well, Claudia and Allison, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us.
We're so excited to be here.
So today we're talking about how to integrate more diverse texts in the classroom. And I've read and enjoyed your book, Conscious Classrooms. I'm really excited for you to share all that you've done, all that you've been working on. And I thought it would be nice to start by talking about why you decided to write this book.
Thanks. We're wondering the same thing. Claudia and I both teach pre-service teachers, and we work with practicing teachers a lot. And we would often get the same types of questions from them, and we would kind of ask each other about which issues they would raise, and we talk about it together. And when it came to using diverse books, there was a lot of fear and discomfort, despite their desire to incorporate these books into their instruction. And so eventually, when the opportunity arose to write a book, we jumped in it.
Yeah.
But it's all in response to what we've heard from the field.
That's so helpful. I feel like responding to the actual real life questions of your teachers in the moment, I mean, that couldn't be better for all of us who are reading it, because those questions are parallel, all over the world.
Yeah.
I thought maybe as a foundation, could you share a little bit of the research around providing students with really widely varied, diverse texts, why that's helpful for them to have choice, to have time, to have your support as a teacher to read what they really are drawn toward and interested in?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so many different bodies of research or ways to look at the research when it comes to this, and they all say the same thing, which is that diverse books are just so important. So, for example, when you're talking about research behind culturally responsive teaching, right? We know that CRP, or culturally responsive pedagogy, leverages students' language and cultural strengths to support their academics. And we know that culturally relevant texts can improve student outcomes by helping students connect their comprehension to their identity. And that's from as far back as 1994, 95, right, with Gloria Ladson-Billings' work, and in 2009, Gray. And then when we think about students' responses to books and their writing, we know that writing, when it's provided to students as a form of resistance, it's super engaging, especially as kids go up in the grades. And then we've got like this idea of, there's a ton of research about rap and hip hop in the classroom as early as K1, right? And so it's that idea that this culturally responsive stuff is just, the content is so good for the kids. And then going back to the more traditional literacy research around motivation and engagement, we know that diverse books can improve both motivation and engagement. And that student choice is another, there's a long research history on student choice, and it supports motivation to read and comprehension. And then it supports out of school reading as well, as kids get better at choosing books that they like and self-selecting. And so all of that supports increased reading time, increased reading ability, comprehension, etc. And some of the studies are qualitative and others are quantitative, but they all point in the same direction, which is really great.
Yes, fabulous. I mean, I think everybody listening is pretty much on board and wanting to provide this, and sometimes is having to defend that choice to administrators or parents or colleagues. And so it's just so helpful to know that there's this enormous body of research across many layers to support these decisions. It's great. I appreciated sort of getting a look at so many different areas of research in your book. So my next question is, now as people come completely on board and they feel comfortable, they're wanting to push and choose more diverse texts for their classroom libraries, what are some qualities they can be looking for in the books that they choose? And equally important, maybe, what are some qualities they can look to avoid?
Yeah, so we really like to encourage teachers to start with getting to know their students first, right? And you can do this, I mean, certainly at the very beginning of the school year, but if teachers are jumping into this or listening to this podcast now, we're in spring right now, so they could still start doing this now. So there's no kind of timeline on it that's perfect. But we encourage them to get to know their students and also to keep an eye out for books that will serve as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors for each of the students in their classroom. So texts are mirrors when they reflect back a student's own life, and they're windows when they give students a glimpse into a different perspective, and they can be sliding glass doors when students are so engaged in a book that they feel like they can step through into a world that's completely different from their own. And we encourage teachers that once they identify these books, right, that serve as mirrors, as sliding glass doors and windows for their students, we do offer some criteria for them to use to think more deeply about each text they want to use with their students. And we also want to note that there's been criteria for selecting diverse books for a really long time. Allison and I have been using them in different forms since before we wrote this book. And we drew on some of this criteria and adapted it to create a tool that we share in our book that we call Analyzing a Text for Diversity and Representation. So the criteria include researching the authors and the illustrators' background. So who are they? Who are the folks that wrote it and who illustrated the text? We encourage teachers to analyze the illustrations as well for any stereotypes, and also to study the relationships among the characters in the storyline. And the full list of this criteria is in our book. So teachers can use a tool to help them identify possible issues with individual books, and importantly, to really kind of get them to start brainstorming ways to address these issues. So you asked about, anything to look out for in terms of anything that they should avoid or text to avoid. And in our book, we encourage teachers to work through any of these issues. We're not telling them, avoid this text or blacklist texts of any kind. We really hope that teachers will be aware of possible issues with different texts through using the tool. And if they choose to use the text, to be prepared to address the issues with their class and maybe use it as a great teaching moment in itself and engage their students in conversations about what might the issues be here. So we don't, again, I want to kind of say that again, that we're not telling teachers in the book at all, avoid this text or avoid texts that do this. Right. We can use it as a learning opportunity. And we hope teachers will feel supported to be able to do that throughout our book.
Yeah, I thought that was a really helpful aspect of the book, saying like, look, here are some really helpful criterion. Your book may not fit every single one, but just by looking at them and considering it, then you know as you approach discussion, as you prepare writing prompts, you can be looking for those chances to talk about the gaps or the holes in representation in the book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, kind of as an extension of that question, I wanted to talk about something you bring up that I think it's such an easy trap to fall into, and that is this issue of books that focus on like a certain aspect, a certain issue that a group might face, like a group with a shared identity that might be dealing with some big issue in society, and to have too many books that sort of focus on an issue instead of just celebrating and exploring different aspects of life, all different aspects of life, all different types of relationships. Can we explore this kind of pitfall that can come up sometimes?
Yeah, that's a really great point, and you expressed it so nicely. I think Goldie Muhammad and others address this really well, and I think what you really got to there is just the idea that balance is needed, right? And so if we represent a particular group of people as only having this particular trouble, whether it's trouble with policy, poverty, police, crime, immigration, whatever it is, then that's the only view of them that our students will get. And so we want to make sure that that's balanced with joy, as Goldie Muhammad says, with the beautiful aspects of their lives, their experiences, their languages, their cultures. And so we want to make sure that we're using books across the spectrum, like from representation where you just have a particular child who's having some kind of day and it's got nothing to do with their race or culture necessarily, right?
Yeah.
So from representation all the way to advocacy, like here's a situation and this happened and here's a particular issue. And so having kind of a range of books is really helpful, and it can help it can help teachers to be really thoughtful about text selection when they're thinking kind of along a spectrum there.
Yeah, really helpful. I think sometimes it's a bit more challenging at the secondary level because, in the primary classroom, you can maybe introduce 100 different books over the course of the year. So it's easier to include representation of many more groups in many different situations. Whereas in secondary, maybe you're going to have 3 whole class texts. But I think that book clubs and choice reading and like featuring books across your display shelf and in your like a first chapter Friday program where you're just bringing in lots of different texts, that's really like an opportunity to provide more variety.
Absolutely. And any like partner texts that you use, like whether they're short articles or little videos or whatever, right? It can kind of balance out the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Like quick poetry clips. There are so many ways to kind of provide many perspectives.
Yeah, and and I want to add too, another cool way that we might be able to do this in secondary classrooms is also through writing, right? So we want to expose them to all of these different kinds of texts, but we also want to invite them to write, it might be short stories or whatever genre of writing you might be focusing on, but talk to them about this balance, right? Like you could be writing about, something that was really wonderful, something that brings joy, and something that is still uniquely tied to one aspect or multiple aspects of your identity, right? Yeah. So I think that's important to highlight too, that we can do it in all of the ways that you shared, but then also, bring it in through writing in our classrooms as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think students would respond to that because over the years, I've had so many groups of students come to me and say, like, why do books in general, the books we read for English class, why does something sad always happen? Why is there a death? Why is there an affair? Why is there like a backstabbing moment? And I'm like, I don't really know. Why?
Yeah. And I think, inviting them and encouraging them to be authors, right? And to write the stories that they wish were out there. And And we do this, in primary classrooms, and maybe you've seen it done in secondary classrooms, but having them author books and include it as part of the text that then the teacher will use, right, in their classrooms when they work with other students, or having them create a text that they can read to younger students. But there's so many possibilities for that.
Yeah. It's really fun to think about. I wanted to ask you guys, I think that so many teachers want to include more contemporary and diverse texts right now, and especially in like certain areas of the country are just very afraid of being challenged. And so I thought it was helpful how in the book you carefully addressed this. You walked us through steps that we could take in advance to prepare the yellow brick road. So can you walk us through those steps a little bit?
Yes, definitely. This is so real right now in so many different, parts of our country, as you just shared. And, before sharing some kind of ideas, we want to acknowledge, the differences, how different it might be for different teachers to approach using these texts in their classrooms, right? So depending on the identities that they themselves have, right, or the communities that they are a part of, they might receive a little bit more critique, right, than other teachers. So, for example, there might be a teacher that, is queer and they're not out in their school, right? But maybe they're a little bit worried about it. They might be a little bit worried about using any texts that, have a gay couple or a gay family or any kind of gay issues in the text, and a teacher that does not identify as queer or gay, right? So we really want to acknowledge that these challenges are different and they feel different. They just bottom line are different for different teachers, right? Yeah. So that being said, we do provide tips, right? Like you just shared. So we encourage teachers to begin with letting folks know in advance that they will be using a book in their class that addresses X topic, right? And we encourage them to do this if they have these concerns. So they can do this by just drafting a simple email to families or caregivers that briefly explain the reasoning for using that particular book. And we also want them to invite families or caregivers to preview the book. They can say, I have multiple copies in my class. If you want to stop in, this week to look through it, or, I can send it home with your child so you can look at it at home. Invite them to do that, and also invite them to have conversations, to talk through questions or any concerns they might have about the book. We also encourage teachers, if their concern is more kind of at the local school level, right, to let their administrators know, right? Just notify them so that they are prepared for any parent concerns as well. And we've talked with administrators as well, and they say they really appreciate this, just to have a heads up, right? Mrs. Smith, I am planning on using this book, in a couple of weeks, and I have notified families and invited them to have conversations about this. I just wanted to give you a heads up just in case anyone approaches you about it, and just share the details of the book as well with them. And giving them like a few days notice, if not a week notice before they read the book, is very helpful to administrators as well. And in our book, we actually share sample emails, like the language that teachers can use to send these emails to caregivers or to send these emails to their administrators, that hopefully will, help them feel a little more comfortable with using these texts and addressing this concern of, am I going to get pushback for doing this? Is just a way to kind of cover their bases and just really open it up for conversation.
Yeah, super helpful. I wanted to move from here and make like a little bit of a shift. The beginning of the show is kind of all about selecting the diverse text, rolling out the diverse text. Now let's sort of fast forward a little bit to we're in the middle of a unit with the text that we've chosen. How can we help our students to build that critical lens in seeing how the perspectives of different diverse groups are represented or not represented in the book that you're reading? I'm really interested to hear what types of discussion questions, writing prompts, regular practices that teachers can just kind of have in mind so that they can take it to the next step, right? Because it's one thing to have these texts. It's another thing to really help students to understand what they're seeing.
Yeah, no, that's That's so important. And I love that you addressed like represented and not represented, because I think it's a tricky thing to get kids to look for who's not there or whose voice is silenced, right? So I appreciate that. But yeah, so I kind of, in my head, I think about this in two steps. And the first step, for some reason, I think about it as the even before work, right? What you have to do before getting started, like making sure you have norms in the classrooms for respect, teaching kids expectations for how to work in small groups in respectful ways. Maybe if you set up book clubs, what that should look like. Whatever instructional strategies you use, just kind of get those routines in place for discussion, for respectful discussions. And then developing those relationships with kids and families is super, super helpful, especially if families do have questions, right? They can come to you instead of going directly to the administrator. And then defining important vocabulary that's really important for the class to have a shared language. So things like stereotypes, racism, tokenism, like what do these things really mean so that we can talk about them in a meaningful way? And then like Claudia was just talking about, really making sure you connect with administrators and colleagues about the fact that you're going to use text that might be considered controversial, and families, of course, as well. And then, so once you've kind of got those norms and routines set up, you can, there's actually what I laughed when I saw this question, because this was kind of a big place of where the book initially came from, was like, what are the sentence stems that we use? And so the book has a bunch of example sentence stems using respectful language, specifically to build criticality. So things like teaching kids to recognize stereotypes and power structures in books, who's helping who has the power or control and who doesn't, right? And so there's sentence stems that set that up. And then teaching kids really explicitly that there are different ways to connect to books and different reasons for doing so. There's sentence stems for that as well. Like, something as simple as, this was a mirror book for me because whatever, right? And obviously there's a lot more complexity that can build to. And then the thing that I've been really excited about, and I've been dying to get into a classroom and see them in action, and I just haven't had a chance in the last couple of months, but we have these new justice-oriented book club roles, and they're the community connector, representation rep, perspective taker, and stereotype seeker, right? So instead of being the class summarizer or the group summarizer, you're making connections to the community, to recent events, or you're looking for representation and power dynamics in the text. And so we're really excited for that. And I guess just overall, we want kids to be able to look for and recognize patterns of power, and when groups are marginalized and silenced, and we want them to be able to do that in books and in life, right? And so if we can get them to start noticing that, we're hoping that they'll be able to apply it to the real world.
Yeah. Yeah. Lovely. The literature circles roles, I'm really intrigued by, and I feel like I could imagine them as like large posters on the wall too, just as something to kind of remind kids during any discussion, whether it's literature circles or just a class discussion, that they can be thinking from that perspective.
Love it. Yeah,
absolutely. And, and it's sometimes helpful too. And I know time is always such an issue, right, in teaching, that we never have enough time to cover, do all of the things that we want to do. But it's super, super helpful if when you're using these new roles, right, they're new to the teacher, they're going to be new to the students as well, is to really practice using it and break each of these down, right? So maybe focus on community connector and representation rep during one period, right? What does that look like? Let's practice doing this, and then focus on the other two roles in the next class period before launching in and having them actually do it, right? Because we want to be very thoughtful about this. We don't want this to be, it's so easy for this to be superficial, right? And just say, oh, I'm making connections. That's not what community connector is, right? So I think just really devoting that time to work with students and develop a class understanding of what do these mean how are these different, and how can I actually, play this new book club or literature circle role in the future. So like I said, I mean, time is always such an issue, but it's so important to really support students to learn how to do this work.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to throw you guys a quick curveball. This question has just sort of been on my mind as we've been talking. And I think I've seen a lot of teachers post, like in my Facebook group, we're about to read this text, and I have a family that's saying they don't want their child to read it, and I need to provide an alternative. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? The whole providing alternative texts. How can you engage with a family that is saying they don't want their child exposed to a certain book?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is so tricky.
Yeah. I don't expect you to have a perfect answer.
No, I think the first thing, right, is to like really listen for what their concern is and try to get that really well defined, because sometimes people say X and mean Y, not intentionally, but or someone says X and you interpret it as Y or whatever it is, right? So kind of trying to get a better understanding of what that is. And then I think it can be useful if you ask the family to make suggestions for other books, right? So what would be appropriate? Like here are the standards I need to cover. Like, what are you thinking? And kind of bringing them into some of that decision making, and hopefully they will provide the opportunity for the teacher to share their thinking as well around why the book was chosen, because these books are chosen really thoughtfully, especially in the upper grades, because like you said, you've got limited time because the books are longer.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like Allison just said, is really sitting down yourself and saying, okay, why am I using this book? And share that with this family, right? So give them the standards, give them the other pieces of the book that, were really appealing to you and the reason why you wanted to use it, and invite them to give you ideas, right? Of what other book, right? What do you think would work while meeting all of these different expectations? I think that would be great. And, we do need to listen to families. We need to hear their concerns. And I think Allison is so right that sometimes, we hear one thing, but really what is meant is another. So I think trying to kind of unpack this and invite them for a longer conversation, if they're open to it, would be really helpful, because it might be that they completely misunderstood what the book is about, right? And it was a title, right? Or something else that completely put them off. And when you kind of explain to them what it is, they might understand it a little bit better. So, but like Allison said, right? Like time is tight, and we recognize that.
Yeah. Okay, helpful. Well, as we wrap this up, I wanted to ask each of you, Claudia and Allison, for some of your favorite titles for the classroom, whether it's for the choice reading shelf or a full text for the entire class. What would be some of your gold star recommendations that you love?
Yeah, we love talking about books, especially
Me too.
Love adult literature. So we do have some recommendations. So I have some of my top 3, and it was really hard to even get to these top 3, right? But I will share them. So one of them that I read, I think it was like last year, is by Case and Callender, and it's Felix Ever After. And the novel is about a transgender teen falling in love for the first time and working through who he is. And one of the things that I love is that it does have like those moments of joy, right? And just that I just found really, really powerful in that novel. And then also just Elizabeth Acevedo's novels are really some of my favorites. Yeah, Allison's too. Clap When You Land, and also with The Fire on High. They're really great and focus on. I think the main character identifies as Mexican American in it, so those are amazing. And then also, it's a little bit more intense, but a novel by Tiffany D. Jackson, Monday's Not Coming, is really, really powerful. A really powerful YA novel. It centers on a teenage girl's disappearance through the eyes of her best friend. And it's been really one of my favorite books to date in the YA category. So those are my top 3.
Wonderful.
And I am going to suggest, it's not a new name, but really anything by Jacqueline Woodson. And one of the things I love about her is that, whether it's kindergarten or high school, she's got a book for you.
It's true.
Right? And so and even some of her picture books are good enough and deep enough that they can be used in high school. Ruta Sepetys, and I'm not sure I said her last name right, but it's Sepetys. She has amazing historical fiction, which I love that genre, and I love her. And her latest book, I Must Betray You, deals with a family in Romania. The main character is a teenage boy. And it's just like, I didn't know anything about Romania. And like, you just felt like you were in this kid's head. It was really great. But everything by her I've liked. The Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Booley. I don't know if I'm saying her name right either. I'm sorry, but it takes place on the Ojibwe Nation, and it's written by a Native woman, and it's so good. It's like action-packed. It's got everything like guns, drugs, FBI, you name it.
I love that one too.
Yeah.
It's so good.
I'd be surprised if it's not made into a movie.
Yeah.
And then finally, Matt de la Pena is another really well-known name. But for middle school and for boys, like he's got some really great chapter books, and I adore his children's books as well.
Yeah.
I love one of his short stories. It's about like this short story that he had to write for his English teacher about his life, and he does it all through what he learned on the basketball court. It's really good.
Yeah.
Ooh, I haven't read that one. I just added one of the Must Betray You to my Libby. I just downloaded it
during the call.
Yes, I just downloaded it. It's kind of audiobooks too. So I appreciate this list too.
I was thinking,
yeah, I didn't know Ruta Sepetys, and I used to live in Bulgaria, so a book set in Romania would be interesting to me in that way.
Yeah. It was fascinating. The one thing I'll say though is that some of these books that we've listed have like violence, sex, even rape, and they're beautifully written, and they were written for a YA audience. We just always suggest that teachers read the books completely before they share them, because you need to know, right? Like if there's something like that.
Yeah. Sometimes teachers have like a certain shelf in their choice reading library that parents have to provide permission before kids can take books off that shelf, or, they just have like a sticker on some books that says, check in with me before you read this or whatever. There are so many ways to address those possibilities.
Yeah,
that is perfect. And I think, just making sure we read them in their entirety. And I know being a former elementary, but teacher, I remember, looking through some of the books, I read part of it and then I put it on my shelf. But I didn't make the time or find the time to be able to read it in its entirety. And so there were moments where I wish I had. So I think, Allison just said, is definitely read these in advance. And they're such good and fun reads. Listening to them on Libby, right? Libby and I are best friends on, my little. So it's a really good idea. Yeah.
Yes. Good advice. Well, Claudia, Allison, thank you so much for coming on. We're recommending Conscious Classrooms to everybody listening, but where else can listeners go to learn more about your work or follow along with you?
I'm not a huge social media person, but this is Allison, and I'm on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is at Briceño 21. So it's ABRICENO 21.
And I, maybe like some of your listeners, I am on like Instagram and Facebook, but I don't post. So I'm like, I don't know.
Nowhere. Read the book.
So I don't and I have a Twitter handle, but I can't even remember it. That tells you how much I'm right. But you can definitely, like Google us, find our, faculty pages. And I will make a better effort though of like using some of this social media to advertise any presentations we have coming up. as well. So, and we, and our emails, I think are, a great way to be able to get in touch with us as well. So for me, I'll share my email. I'm at Santa Clara University. So yeah. So
yes, I'll put it in the show notes. You don't have to try to spell it out.
That's right. I'm not going to. Yes. But email is a great way to be able to reach out to us as well.
Yes,
Perfect.
totally.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you so very much.
Yes, thank you.
We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for joining us today. As usual, you can head to the show notes to dig deeper and to my website at nowsparkcreativity.com to find free creative resources to help you get started with choice reading and much more. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.